Hello, and welcome to Uncommon Sense on FinCrimeTV. In this episode, we're going to look at crimes against the elderly. There are many classes of victims in a wide range of crimes, and most of them are often referred to as vulnerable. In many cases, the term is used for effect, but there are two classes of person who are vulnerable in the true sense of the word: those with inhibited mental capacity and the elderly. From the financial crime perspective, it's easy to say that it's all about fraud, but the range of frauds that target these truly vulnerable fall into two camps. There's the same type of fraud that targets everyone, but the vulnerable don't have the defense mechanisms to identify and reject them. And then there are frauds that specifically target the vulnerable. From money laundering schemes to acting as a front for fraud, from selling worthless shares to knocking on doors and claiming to be from an authority needing to do an inspection, and many more, the situation is made worse by technology. My guest today is Madalyn Stone, who specializes in investigating offenses against the elderly, which in the USA is termed elder abuse, and has made an academic study of the subject. And it's from that perspective that she joins us today in a personal capacity. Madalyn Stone, welcome to FinCrimeTV's Uncommon Sense.
Thank you. Thanks for
You've
having
worked
me.
in the field of crimes against the elderly for about a decade. Why don't you tell us in a couple of minutes about your background and your experience in this field?
Sure. I feel like it was kind of dumb luck falling into elder abuse, and I feel very lucky to have had this opportunity. It's a very interesting type of crime that targets the elderly. Because I think we don't want to, I think the aging process is very intimidating to people. So it's a population that tends to kind of fall out of vision, but within the scope, as they kind of fall off the radar of society in general, they become then better targets by predators. And so as I have kind of learned about that, in particular, financial fraud schemes really caught my interest as I've been doing this work. And that prompted me about 4 or 5 years into my studies to pursue a graduate degree in criminal justice with a focus on elder abuse, but also proposing a response system to financial fraud schemes, because that is a large missing piece to what we're dealing with. So you have the fraud schemes in and of themselves are a problem, but part of the problem is we are not responding to them appropriately when they actually do get reported. And with the elders, the senior population, they experience a greater financial loss than younger populations, and are not able to remake that money. So money that they need to use for their aging experience and any health changes. And so the loss of that financial cushion can, we know statistically, does impact them psychologically. So it could actually, we've seen that it does impact their longevity. And then so there's an actual physical impact on their lives due to the loss of the money. A 20-year-old can remake $5,000. If a 20-year-old had $5,000, they could get that money back within a short period of time. Someone who's retired at 80, a $5,000 loss is a lot of money. So my interest was to try to understand based on my field experience, what else is out there. And then specifically, I focused on the state that I live in. What can we do here? And then from there, I also have secured my credential as a certified fraud examiner, just to help buoy kind of my knowledge base on fraud, and hopefully use that with my cases.
In the 10 years or so that you've been doing this, have there been many changes in the nature of the offenses that you see?
I wouldn't know. There's pretty general categories. I think there's been changes in how society understands what's targeting this population, how getting law enforcement better trained on what to do when they get these types of cases, because historically they've been viewed as a social problem or a family problem versus as an actual crime. So I think I've seen that kind of change, which is good. But I haven't necessarily seen, we've got physical abuse, neglect, financial, sexual abandonment, restraints, things like that. So those issues have always been there. It's just how we understand them and how to build a case when we get that is, I think that's done. We're doing good at that.
Sorry, how often do you see a link between all those kinds of physical, from everything from neglect to sexual or physical abuse? How often do you see a link between that and financial crime?
Oh, definitely. There's a decent link between neglect and financial crime, but not necessarily, I wouldn't say like the fraud, the fraud schemes, but more the financial motive for someone who might be taking care of another individual. And so the neglect part, so basically they've taken on a legal duty to care for an individual. But who is that person that's taking on that legal duty? Is it an adult child? Is it a new person in their life? How did this relationship come to be? And is there a financial gain for the person doing that work? What is their financial situation? And so I guess with all of that, when it comes to neglect, it's kind of like, unfortunately, we do see cases where someone agrees to take care of someone, the person dies, and there's potentially a financial benefit for the person who had been taking care of that now deceased person.
So we're looking at a combination of skimming and just literally grabbing the money at the end. Is it a matter of fashion? I mean, one of the things that I've noticed in certain types of fraud is that they go around in cycles. So we will see, for example, the idea of somebody knocking on a door saying you've got something that's wrong with your roof. I can get it fixed before the council come round, or something like that. And we see that happens for a period of time, and then it kind of disappears, or more or less disappears, and then comes back maybe 3, 4, 5 years later. We see in internet crime that there are no longer any cycles, or if they are, they're only a matter of weeks, which is interesting. So the 419 scams, for example, which target everybody, but there are certain groups of people who tend to fall for it more readily. Those used to be the different types of 419 scam. 419 scam is advanced fee fraud. Different types of that. Nigerian prince this week. In 3 months' time, it would be a different excuse. We see from time to time when there are trouble spots, we see the same kind of thing coming along. In the run up to 1997, for example, there were a lot of people taken in by fraud saying that people were trying to get flight capital out of Hong Kong. So these things come round and round in cycles. They're often triggered by events in the news. But in relation to targeting the elderly, do we see that same sort of cyclical move, or is it just all day, every day?
I think a lot of it just depends on what's getting how well people are reporting. So is it cyclical, or is that we're having a low report rate? So because there's such an element of shame that the victims experience when they've been targeted, that they often don't report. So I think it depends. So for example, you might have, that door-to-door thing. We're actually starting to see that more. That, to me, based on the amount of time I've been doing this, that's actually let me back up there. So I haven't seen door-to-door where that's the initiation of a scam. I'm hearing about it. I haven't had any cases on that yet, but I've heard it. I know it's local. And so that's kind of new. And so I don't know if I would call it cycles or evolution of crime, of these types of cases. So for example, the tech scams, the Microsoft tech scams, where they would come in like, oh, there's something wrong with your computer, accidentally gave you too much money back, here, let me refund you, as gave you too much money. So what we've seen on that is the evolution of that, from my subjective experience, is that it's now what the FBI is calling a phantom hacker scam, because it starts as a tech scam and it evolves into a government impersonator scam. And so that's new. And so the only way we know about that is if somebody reports. And so, and again, there's such a shame issue. So I think, I don't know if I would call it cycles versus evolution. Like these folks who are, the predators, the perpetrators of this, they're just learning different ways to do it. So maybe it's not that the tech scam is cycling through, it's just, it's evolved into a different format.
The door-to-door thing, the history of that is that it, once a victim has been identified, that victim's details then passed around amongst groups of criminals, and the same people and different criminals come back 2, 3, 4 weeks later with another thing. So it's everything from tarmacking your drive to checking your gas to holes in the roof or anything that they can think of. And the same people get hit over and over again. We don't see that in the tech scams. We don't see the same victims over and over again.
Actually, we can. We do have that. So what I've learned doing this is, I think that would probably be similar to that sucker list, right? Their information is sold. And so when I meet with victims, I educate them on just letting them know, like, you're gonna be more vulnerable to future attacks. And so we do have victims that have experienced multiple attacks because their information has been sold. And so so I think we do see that, actually, at least on my end, I've seen that.
Oh, right. That's I'm kind of troubled by that, because what are the defenses to that? Change your phone number? Change your email address? I mean, if we're going to try to protect elderly people, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is make sure those elderly people don't end up on your doorstep. That's the ultimate objective, isn't it? So you're looking to identify what's gone wrong so that the victims or potential victims can be educated. But we can't build a moat around them. So what can we do to mitigate the risk?
So at least in the United States, at the federal level, there's been a real push for education and outreach to the population, the elderly, the age population, letting them know what kind of scams are out there. And I think, and I'm kind of on the fence about education outreach. Yeah, we need it. But I think that because I've met a lot of these victims, they're not just, they're not necessarily always cognitively on the cognitive decline, right? They're actually highly intelligent, educated, and it's just this one moment of vulnerability. Sometimes it really just seems like this just little, like, they were traveling, they come home, they get a call at 6 o'clock in the morning. So they're kind of groggy and it just catches them at the wrong time. They're in mourning, so now they're vulnerable, to being targeted by a romance scam. So I think that there's just moments of vulnerability, no matter how great your education and how much public outreach and education outreach there is, it's not going to matter in that moment. So I think that, and what ends up happening is this cognitive dissonance. So I think that we can't protect everyone. Education outreach is necessary, but is not foolproof. And so I think really from my perspective, based on my experience and my academic research, I would say that we need to do rapid identification of where the victims are. Who is the victim? What's going on? We need that rapid identification so we can get out there and start talking to them, because again, there's a significant cognitive dissonance going on that can take a lot to get through. It really, they are, the other thing with when these hits happen, when you have a retired person who maybe they're, don't have children, or their children moved away, they have hours at home alone. And that person is on the phone with them or texting them all day long. So they're getting attention. So their time is completely consumed. And so, from my perspective, I'll go out and make contact, but I'm there how long out of a 24-hour day? And I've been there at times where the calls are coming in, ringing, the phone's ringing off the hook. So you have to kind of break that connection. So I think we need to get a rapid identification, and then get law enforcement the tools they need to go after these guys and try to get the money back, any money that's been sent out.
I think the scary thing about all of this is that we've talked about the old-fashioned man on the doorstep, which has been going on since, well, forever, really. But the telephone scams, why have we failed to make people alert to telephone scams when this has been going on with boiler shops all over the world for at least a quarter of a century?
Mm-hmm.
Ever since we got cheap phone calls and people could put everyone's saying scam call centers are the new big thing. They're not. They've been around since we got cheap international telephone calls with least cost routing, which was the 1990s. We've had scam call centers all over the Far East targeting the USA, Australia, and Europe. So there's nothing new about this at all, literally nothing. Why is it that this message about this type of fraud has failed to get across?
To the victims, to people who are potentially targeted. So, kind of getting into criminology side of it, we have, from what I've seen and kind of what I landed on, and which another academic, her name is Marty DeLima, and so she's currently at the University of Minnesota. There's routine activity theory, which in cop speak, it's a crime of opportunity. And so you have, you just kind of get the trifecta of a vulnerable person without a capable guardian, and then that willing criminal. And so the phone rings, they're lonely, no one's talking to them, or there's just that moment of vulnerability of they're tired. So I think that a lot of people do fend off these calls. So I think that we do have a lot of people who are managing. We're not hearing that. There's not a lot of chatter about that, right? It's when the fire erupts that we're going to be looking at that. So I think a lot of folks do actually are able to protect themselves. We're just not tracking that data as well. I'm not familiar with what that data is. But when it's the folks that are who are successfully targeted, then at such devastating numbers, that it just ends up being such a devastating experience for them. So I don't know. I think that, it's been around for a long time, but I think some people think they can maybe outsmart the bad guy too. I don't know.
Well, that depends on them actually working out that they are the bad guys. I think that one of the things that troubles me about this is we're now talking about elders being people who are now 65, 70, 80 years old. And yet, because we know this identical conduct has been around for 25 years, when this stuff was in the news for pump and dump, for various boiler room scams and the like, and for that matter, tech support scams, these people were in their prime. This should be embedded in their memories. It should not be something they're learning today. So the question that troubles me is, why have we been so unsuccessful in embedding the cynicism in people when they were fully alert, so that when they're not fully alert, it's second nature to think, I don't like that idea.
Right. Well, I think so. Part of the aging process, we kind of when with kids, you have to teach them stranger danger. And at the other end of the age group and, aging experience is a loss of stranger danger, of recognizing that. So I think that, you know, some data out there says that has shown that folks that do fall victim to these types of fraud schemes, no matter how intelligent they are, they're showing that they're most likely on the dementia scale. So that, you know, in terms of what you're saying, hey, they were in their prime when, and, you know, it's, I think from our perspective, it's kind of ad nauseum of how much information is out there and we should all know about this. But I think the average person really doesn't pay attention. They don't think it's going to happen to them either, right? Nobody thinks it's going to happen to them. And so I think, you know, that's going to, you know, make someone more vulnerable just in thinking that can't happen to me. But I think so we have a combination of factors. There's maybe hubris on the victim's part of like, they didn't think it could happen to them. And then there's just brain changes, age-related brain changes that's that, you know, that vulnerable person without a competent guardian. And that's how that bad guy kind of gets in there. It's just that because that competent guardian is a competent brain. Like if you don't have another individual in your household protecting you, then your competent guardian is your healthy brain. And if your brain, as our brain ages, we know, you know, as much as our ego doesn't want to believe it, we are becoming more vulnerable as we age on the cognitive scale. So yeah, I think that we just they were, yeah, in their 30s, sure, they got it, but now they're 75, 80, and you know what life experiences have worn them down on the in between, right? How much loss have they experienced? So they're not the same person. We're not the same person at 75 as we were at 30, even if we heard about it at that age.
So we can't embed risk aversion into people. So when we say about let's teach 14-year-olds because that's going to protect them, it probably won't. So
I think that through the prime of their life, right? I mean, I think that, you know, we can, you know, within the prime of our life, I don't think it's wrong to make sure people are educated and aware, not only for themselves. I think the other portion of this is like, okay, then what do people do when they see someone being targeted, right? How do you protect them? So I wish there was an easy answer for that. But yeah, I think I would never say let's not teach kids how to protect themselves against this. But I think just the nature of a fraud scheme is suspending their disbelief, right? They're trying to get somebody to suspend their disbelief. And unless you're just not engaging or hanging up right away, the more you expose yourself to that play, the more vulnerable you become. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that I would definitely just continue educating the young folks. I think on the older folks, we need rapid identification. Like we're not going to be able to eliminate them being targeted or being taken advantage of.
So ultimately, as people get older, law enforcement, in its broadest sense, not law enforcement really, but the criminal, the approach to criminality it switches from preventative to reactive.
Yeah, I think that because by the time, you know, I'm just thinking of like, how do we, you know, the younger age groups versus because, with the older groups, it's we don't know about it until we hear about it, you know, and they're not always the ones reporting it. Sometimes it's the people around them. Usually Indeed. It's the people around them.
Indeed. The last question. There's a move in some countries to make financial institutions liable for losses, for example, romance scams. Do you think this is actually going to help?
I've started to hear that, and I've definitely, I don't see how that's going to help, because I think what I see already is that, you know, the financial institutions recognize the risk associated with a customer who they've educated. They were like, hey, I think this is a scam. And so you're now a risk, and so they'll end their relationship with that individual. Right. So we have a lot of financial institutions that are already taking those steps to protect themselves and the victim to the best that they can, but that results in them, kicking them out of their bank. So if we now make financial institutions financially responsible, I would see we would have probably a higher rate of people being divorced from their financial institutions. And so
do you think there's a risk then that we're going to see psychological, in its broad sense, profiling, and banks saying, I'm sorry, like insurance companies, you are now outside our risk profile, so
right.
Sorry, off you go.
Right. And does that then mean people will move their money into the crypto world? Right.
Well, I'm not sure about crypto, but I think what they will probably do is move into secondary banking, where the fees are much higher, where they may not have the deposit guarantees. I think to suggest that people are going to go into crypto suggests that people think crypto first, and it also suggests that people are familiar with crypto. I think it's much more complicated. It's a hurdle that many people think, I can't be bothered with that. All I need is a bank account, and they can get that from many of the secondary banks, the so-called neo banks, those that are providing banks on a card, and the like. So those are definitely available. But what concerns me about this idea of making the banks responsible is that it removes the moral hazard from the victim. That's the first point. And the second point is that it creates the opportunity, which I see as a massive opportunity, for the financial equivalent of crash for cash, where you will see somebody go to an elderly person, say, if we say I have defrauded you, we will then get the money, so you give me the money, and then we'll get the money back from the bank, and I will give you half of that back to put in this separate bank account.
Oh, yeah, I can see that. I could totally see that. Yeah.
To me, that's the obvious thing that's going to happen with these schemes. And from what you said about the way that the elderly in particular are identified and targeted and talked into schemes, we know that, for example, in Hong Kong long ago, 200 elderly people were talked into opening bank accounts and handing over their checkbooks to a criminal gang in return for the equivalent of about $30 a month. And that was 200 people in one housing estate. So we know that that it is perfectly possible to talk people into these schemes. Even when it's obvious there's something wrong, they should be suspicious. They should question it, but they still go along with it because they see a small gain. And in many cases, they will see, well, what's the harm? Who gets hurt? And I see that as a big future risk for the elderly now, as we're seeing how to deal with the proceeds of various frauds against the elderly. I see a grave risk of money being transferred from one elderly person to another and then out somewhere.
Sure. Oh, we already have that with money muling, the money mules. So that's a big part of the problem when I meet with victims is so first it's like assessing, is it your money that's being sent out, or are you being sent money? And then forwarding it on, and then educating them about that. So I mean, definitely, I mean, I've not only seen money being sent, I've seen jewelry, people having no more cash, and so they're now sending jewelry out. So so yeah, I think that is already, I'm sure that's already happening.
What we're seeing in effect then is not anything new, but we're seeing different types of crime being combined in novel ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're seeing, getting back to the door-to-door fraud, where it's like a service that's being the fraud. I think the new type of fraud, and what we're seeing now is a different type of money mule, which is not just, an elderly person sending it to another elderly person, then sending off soil. It's like someone hired, like somebody within that network, within that criminal network, showing up at the door of the elderly person who can't get to do stuff. And so they'll just pick up the cash at the door. So I see that as a point of evolution. But I don't know. I'm not sure if maybe you can talk more on that. I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're saying on that.
Well, we're seeing historically what has happened is fraudsters have defrauded somebody, taken the money, disappeared. But now what we're seeing is fraudsters saying, send the money to a third party who is also an equally vulnerable person. So it is being laundered through somebody who may well have been used, may well have agreed to a laundering scheme like the people in Hong Kong without realizing it was laundering. So now we're seeing that the hiding of the money is happening through ordinary people who, in many cases, the authorities are probably not going to want to pursue because they are indeed vulnerable people.
Yeah. So definitely, I think a hurdle that we have from what I see is that when you've got your local victim who has sent their money out, now they're broke, and so they're converted to a mule, to a money mule, and so now they're getting dirty checks sent to them. And then a local bank identifies that, so we go out and respond. And so law enforcement, no, they're not going to, their local law enforcement, and if we can trace that money back, we see two victims, not two criminals, right? So that's a very much a part of the problem, that they're using our victims to turning them into criminals. And that's a part of the conversation that I have with victims as well, is you are engaging in money laundering. So I try to be really frank with those who, because just trying to, we talk about trying to break the spell, right? Like cognitive dissonance, trying to get through to that. And so, we focus on the victim so much. And part of my take on it is we need to start turning that a little bit. And our speak needs to be about, well, where is this money going and what is it funding? So we know it's funding human trafficking. We know it's funding, a larger criminal network, drugs, terrorism, things like that. And so rather than just going out and talking to a victim, like, please stop, this is a scam, don't do it. Well, why? Why do we not want them to do it? We don't want them to do it as we don't want you to receive the money, because now you're engaging in money laundering, and that laundering of that money, what's happening to that? This is what's happening to it. It's being used.
It's important to explain that, not simply to say, you're a money launderer, you're going to go to jail for 14 years.
Right.
That's just going to terrify somebody elderly. And that is not the reaction you want. It's not what you want to do. As a human being, you don't want to do that.
No, and I've had decent success when I take that approach, when I educate them and I say, this is what the money's being used for. This, I wouldn't, and then also, do these people ever show up? Now, yeah, we have those couple of people that show up at the door to collect the cash, but generally the people with these ploys, romance, lottery, what have you, I'll be there. They never show up. And then I'll show up and I'll be like, and I'll be here tomorrow. I'm going to keep showing up. I'm going to bring a uniform with me, So, so I think that just kind of getting through to them of, this is reality. And when we say you're engaged in money laundering, we're not lying to you. We're showing up at your door and explaining this to you.
Madalyn, thank you very much. Absolutely fascinating discussion. I'm sure that we'll talk again at some point in the future. Thank you very much indeed.
All right, thank you.